Hey guys, my name is Kevin Ellingson. I'm with Applied Engineering, and today I have Travis Evans from Autodesk with me as well. We're going to talk a little bit about iLogic, Configurator 360, and ETO. I'll give you a little. I'm going to start with a simple rundown of an iLogic part, and then we're going to turn over to Travis, where he's going to show some the new Configurator 360 part and talk about some other configuration technology that Autodesk has. So let me pull up Inventor here. What I'm going to do today is just, we're going to make a part that it's going to end up looking like this. Just a simple plate with some holes spaced across the front. And the idea with this part is as we change the length, the holes are automatically going to be added in, and the holes will stay equally spaced from each end. So let's just go start a new part and get going on this. I'm just going to start a new Inventor part, and I'm going to create a simple sketch. I'm just going to put it on a plane, do a rectangle, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of parameters and dimensions on the fly. So some people don't know you can do this. It's a pretty handy functionality inside of Inventor. I'm going to start my dimension command, and I'm going to call this length. And then I'm going to tell it how long I want that length to be. I'm going to click over here. I'm going to give it a height and tell it how long I want that height to be. So now I have those two dimensions. I can finish my sketch. I'll create an extrusion. And I'm going to, again, name this one on the fly to thickness. And I'm going to give that a thickness. So now I've set up the basic shape of my part. Now I need to go in and add a hole to it. So I'm just going to create a sketch on the front face, drop a hole point in. I'm going to give it a dimension from the edge. Doesn't really matter what this dimension is because we're going to write some iLogic rules in a minute that's going to control this. But I do need, again, to name this as a parameter. So I'm going to call this hole offset and tell it how much I want that hole offset to be. Go ahead and finish that. And then my design intent is for this to be centered from the origin point, so it's always centered vertically on the part. So we'll go ahead and finish that. And now I'm just going to do a hole. And this step isn't necessary, but it'll just show some of the functionality that Inventor has. I'm going to call this hole diameter. And I'm going to set that equal to 0.375. So now I have a lot of the functionality I need for this part. When we use iLogic, we're going to do things, we're going to control the parameters of a part in kind of an automated way. So if you don't know, we can find the parameters of the part either by going to the Manage tab and clicking on the FX button, or oftentimes it's also located up on your Quick Access toolbar. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on Parameters here, and you're going to see here that we're going to have a length parameter, a height parameter, a thickness. All those things that we renamed are now going to show up as our parameters. This D3 parameter, this would be the taper angle if we had any on that extrusion that we created. I don't have any, so therefore it's set to 0 degrees. We can come down here, there's a filter button, and we can choose what parameters show up. So maybe in this case, I like to just see renamed parameters. So now that gets rid of that D3, and we're only looking at the parameters that we need. For this particular part, we need to create a couple more user parameters to control our pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to add a numeric parameter, and I'm going to call this hole count. And since this is a number of holes, we need it to be a unitless parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and choose UL for my parameter, my unit type, and then doesn't matter what this number is, our iLogic code is going to change what this becomes a little bit, but I'll just change it to 3 for now. We need to add one more parameter called hole spacing. You might notice that I'm not using spaces. Parameter names cannot have spaces between them, so what I'm doing is a method where I capitalize each of the different words. Other times what people do is they come and they do an underscore between the different words to make them easier to read. So my method, I'm just going to do the capitalization of each of the words. I'll leave it as inch for this one, and again, it doesn't matter what this number is. We're going to fix it with iLogic, but just so you can see something happen on the screen, I'll change it to say 4. So now we've got our parameters set up. Interesting thing about these parameters that sometimes people don't know too is that we can just come in here and start changing these numbers, and you can see our part will actually update. So as we click on different values and click enter, our part's going to update accordingly. And so this is, we're going to do some of the same thing with iLogic, but more in a more automated way. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit done now. So one of the last steps I need to do is to do my my pattern. So I'm going to go back to my 3D model tab. I'm going to select my rectangular pattern command. I'm going to tell Inventor I want to pattern this hole. We'll pattern it along this edge and change my direction. But we're not going to tell it how many or give it a numerical value here. We're going to refer to those parameters that we created just a minute ago. So for the number of instances, I want to call this hole count. And for this field, I want to call it hole spacing. Now, if you don't remember them, you can also come and list your parameters of your part and see what are in there as well. So in my case, I remember what they were. If you get a complicated part with a lot of parameters, sometimes you might need to pop open this dialog box to see what you've made in your part so far. So here it's red, so you can see that I spelled spacing wrong. Okay, so now everything is black. Our pattern is starting to change a little bit. The one other thing that we need to do for this particular example is set our options to distance here. Again, our pattern isn't looking correct. That's all right. We're going to fix that in a minute with our iLogic code. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And now I've pretty much got my modeling on this part all set up, and now it's time to start doing some coding. So there's a couple ways we can get to doing our coding. We can go to our Manage tab and turn our iLogic browser on, or we can go to the View tab, and under User Interface there's also an option to turn the iLogic browser on. So I'll just go ahead and click that, and now you can see I get a separate browser from my part browser, and this browser is going to be used for adding my rules and forms and things like that. So what we'll do now, we'll want to add a rule, and there's two ways we can go about adding a rule. We can either click on the Add Rule button off of our toolbar in our Manage tab, or I can right-click somewhere down here and say Add Rule. Now it wants to know, what do we want to call this? We'll just give it a rule name. I guess hole spacing is what we'll call this one. This one doesn't matter if it has spaces or anything like that in there. Go ahead and click OK. And it's going to pop up something called the IDE, or the Integrated Development Environment. This is where we're going to write our code for our iLogic part. It's broken in a couple places. We have some code snippets that are already pre-done sets of code for us that I'm going to use in a minute. We see some different parts of our model tree here that we can grab, and then some parameters. So for instance, if I clicked on this extrusion, it lists some of the parameters that are included with that extrusion. And then this window down here is where we're going to write our iLogic code. So what I'm going to start off with is they've got some, iLogic has some built-in functionality for us. The code is kind of, in some ways, there's little templates you might say. So what I'm going to start out with is an if, then, end if statement in programming. So when I click on this, you can see what happens if it says if my expression then, and then an end if. So this my expression is kind of a placeholder. So what we're going to have to do is go in there and change these placeholders for the actual code that we'd like to write. So what I'm going to say is if length is less than 12, then what it's going to do is we're going to say set the hole spacing equal to 1, and then now here's the part where we're going to control the pattern going across our part. We're going to say that the hole, I'm sorry, this should be hole offset is equal to 1. So that's how far away from the edge the holes are going to end up. Now we're going to go down and set our hole spacing option, and we're going to set that equal to the length of the part minus the hole offset times 2, because we want this distance to be equal on both sides. And then we're going to come down and set the hole count. So this is going to be our number of holes. It's going to equal an integer of the length divided by 2. So this rule is pretty much saying if the length is less than 12, then the offset from each end has to be 1, and this sets the hole spacing for that part across there. Now we want to do something, what if it doesn't meet that requirement? So we're going to come down and we're going to add an else if statement in there. So I'm going to hit my drop down. So if this isn't the case, then this is going to be the case. So in this case, if my expression, again, we're going to use length, if it's greater than or equal to 12, in this case, we're going to do a multi-value set list. We're going to let the hole be certain distances away from the edge. So I don't remember exactly what that code is. So over on the side, I'm going to be able to reference that. And where I'm going to reference this particular feature is underneath the parameters snippet. So I'm going to come over here, and here is a set list. So I'm going to double click on that, and you can see that it adds that proper snippet of code in here. And now all I have to do is change that to be the proper parameter name. So I'll add my hole offset, and then the values offset from the edge that I want to have. So we'll add a couple more. We'll change this to be 1.5. We'll do a 2.0, 2.5, and a 3.0. So now I'm basically going to do the same pattern control. So rather than typing everything over again, I'm just going to take these 2 lines of code and copy them. And I will paste them in right there. So now we have, if our condition is less than 12 inches, then we're going to do a certain thing to this. Or if it's greater than 12 inches, then we're going to do a slightly different thing. And if we've met one of these 2 requirements, we're going to do an end if. There's only one more little thing we would probably want to do, and that's to tell it to update the part without us having to go through and update it. So again, we're going to use a little code snippet, and this one is underneath the Documents heading. And I want to do the update when done. So this is pretty much, once it's done, run the rule. So now when I go ahead and hit OK, we're going to see some things change in our part. So you can see that now we have a set of holes that are equally spaced with their centers being a certain distance from the edge. So now if we come back up to that same parameters control we were doing earlier, we can see if I set this to be 11 inches, it automatically defaults my hole offset to be 1 inches. But if I change this to be 13, then I can come in here and choose different drop-down offsets from the edge. So we've got this part functioning pretty well, and there's just one more thing I might want to do to it. You can see it's still fairly easy to modify, but maybe I want to be able to modify it even faster. So I'm going to create a form for this part, and the way we do this is to go to the Forms tab in the iLogic browser. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose Add Form. And now this is kind of a drag-and-drop functionality for creating a certain dialog box. You can see I have a blank dialog box over here. So what I'm going to do is choose the parameters that I want included in my form. In this case, I'd like to see the length, the height, the thickness, the hole offset, and the hole diameter. So you can see as I drug those in, it dynamically built those in my dialog box over here. And just to show a little bit more functionality, for this hole diameter, I would like to change that from a text box to a slider. And you'll see what that does in a second. It adds this little functionality right there. And once we do that, what we want to do is set our minimum, our maximum, and the amount it increments by. So we'll say, well, the smallest hole I want to have is 1/4 inch. the biggest hole I want to have is 1.75 inches, and let's adjust that value in quarter-inch steps. So now we pretty much got the dialog box the way we want it to. I'll click OK. Now all I have to do for this part is go ahead and click on this form button. It pops up the dialog box, in which case I can just start adding values in there. And if you look, right now the hole offset is 2 inches, but we wrote the rule that says if it's under 12 inches long, the hole offset has to be equal to 1. So if I come and change this rule to 10, or this length to 10, it automatically changes my hole offset to 1. Now I can go and choose a different one from the box, but right away it changes it right back to 1. And here's the slider functionality. As I just drag that slider, you can see that we're dynamically changing the hole. We're still not limited. I could still enter in a value that's not in a quarter-inch increment, and it works. So the first part of this presentation, I just wanted to show you that iLogic doesn't have to be used for crazy complicated things. It can be used for individual parts. If this was an example of a part that you use a lot, you can see it took a little bit of effort to get it set up, but now to modify this part as I need to is extremely simple. And Travis is going to give us an example of some higher end uses of iLogic and forms and things like that. So with that, I will turn it over to Travis Evans from Autodesk.
All right, thanks, Kevin. I like the point you make that if we're using these parts again and again and again, then it makes sense to put a little bit of that work on the front end to get that configuration over. So just go ahead and I'll display my screen now. And we want to build on top of that. So we saw something we can, working from a simple part. What if we want to utilize iLogic and those parameters? Kevin did such a great job of explaining for us how we can leverage that information moving forward. So here we can kind of see, and we'll just kind of highlight the recap of some of the things that Kevin showed us. So we have all of our parameters. You can see this has a lot more parameters we're dealing with in assembly. As we made some changes, so maybe some different parameters we want to control in this is, what type of slide engagement do we want? What kind of stairs do we want? Do we want this to be one base, or do we want to have 2 bases, or do we want to have different swing types? So we built some of those rules inside that's going to help to configure those parameters. And then building on top of that, on top of iLogic, we can see some of those rules that we built. Kevin showed a simple if-then statement rule. So if we want to look at some of these other rules that may be a little bit more in depth, I'll just go ahead, bring up that dialog that we can kind of see that we've already gone through, but now we can kind of see a little bit building up some more of the complexity. So you can see a lot of different components here. For this particular rule, what it's going to do is going to turn on or turn off different components. So this entire assembly includes all the options that we could possibly want, or that we would possibly offer in our catalog. But what this is going to do is turn on and turn off some of those particular components based on some other criteria. For example, if I say that I want 1 base, it's going to turn off the bridge. The bridge is not going to be available. But if I have 2 bases, well, what kind of bridge do I want? Do I want a bridge with a tunnel? Do I want a bridge with some swings underneath it? So you can kind of start to see as we'll build this out. But using that same functionality, some of those basic criteria that most coding is going to be is, if this, then what? As we showed with some of that simple parts. So now I want to look at that from an assembly perspective. So go ahead and cancel out of that, and you can kind of see I can build up these different forms. So I can have multiple forms inside of one particular project, but we're going to choose to look at this one today to kind of see how we can interact with that. So here we set up different tabs, so different tabs that are going to be controlling the way that this criteria is going to go across. So if we highlight, okay, we mentioned, well, I want to have 2 bases or I want to have 1 base, so I can go ahead and include an image of that. We can go ahead in the railings, I can kind of see, what's going to be my options. So if I'm talking about my left side, my right side, then if it's double base, I'm going to have different options. And as you can kind of see, if I have a rule that's built inside, so there's a single base, so if I want to try to add something to this configuration, it's going to go ahead and try to build it, but then in the end, it's going to suppress it because it's in violation of some of those rules I built inside with iLogic. Let's go ahead and look at just some of these configurations so we can choose from. So look at the different stairs. We can go through and look at this single item, and we can change this maybe from a rock wall to maybe a rope climb. We can kind of see, as it Inventor's just running kind of in the background, running those rules, updating those model parameters, and now the rock wall's going away, and now we have our rope swing. So now we can go ahead, bring up that rope climbing wall inside of Inventor, and bring that back for us. So one of the great things here was talking about Inventor, and the functionality that iLogic really has to bring with us is the capability we have to really start to change up our designs. Nothing's going to be configured that we don't want, but we can go ahead and choose that options, those things as they kind of come across. So a little bit of technical difficulties here, Kevin, so give me just a second with I work through this GoToMeeting.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so what we want to maybe take a look at is maybe the next step is we've seen how the configurations can work. We want to look at other options that Autodesk has to provide that we can now uncover. So one of the things that Autodesk has just released is Autodesk Configurator 360. So now we can take a look at Autodesk Configurator 360 and think of the things that we can do. So what Inventor is great for is for the engineer. I'm going through, I'm making that documentation, I'm pushing out those parts and those assemblies, maybe making those documentation to push out to the shop floor, but I'm really using those components. But what Configurator 360 allows us to do is push that information up onto the cloud. So being able to access it through a web browser, also having an application that we can push out to the iPad. So now we can kind of look at some of those different things that we can offer through Configurator 360. So one of the benefits is we can control this information. So we can control who sees it. So you can kind of see some of the designs that I've uploaded into my configurator. What's going to allow us to do is it's user-based, so I can log in with my Autodesk ID, and it's tied to my information. So if I'm an administrator, if I'm just a simple user, it's going to recognize that. So there's that permissions-based control here. So here's that same playset model we were just looking at inside of Inventor, but we want to look at how we can configure this maybe for more of a sales engagement, so I can get this information to my customers, so my customers can do the configurations. So I've built in those rules. I've highlighted that information in iLogic. We saw some of the GUI interaction where I can select from some of the drop-downs, but now I can actually go to my catalog information. So I can pull up that catalog inside of Configurator 360, and this is unique for me. So I can customize my application. I can have my logos. I can have hyperlinks that go to specific websites. So I can really start to customize this so it works and feels for me as a customer, so I can get my customers the information that they need. So we'll go ahead and look at this playset, and what it's going to allow us to do is run through those same kind of configurations that we saw with iLogic, selecting some of those different parameters and having it kind of build out that information for us. But again, access anywhere. So I can give this access to anybody who has connection to the internet, and I can choose who I give this access to. So there's that level of security. So here we can go and we can look. We have our single base model, but maybe I wanted to take a look at, I want two bases. So when I add another base, what are some of those rules? Again, we highlight some of that information back in iLogic and how it can build up through that application. But now we can really start to hone in on some of those different configurations, because again, what means the value it brings is giving that information to the customer. So the customer is the one who's going to be configuring this. So we want to give them those options. So we can kind of see that now I have two slides. I have two swing sets in between these two bases. Maybe if I wanted to change that configuration and maybe add a third set of swings. So I can go ahead. Configurator is just going to run those rules, run those checks. It's not apparent to the user, so they don't know what's going on in the background. They don't have to understand the engineering perspective. They just want to say, hey, what options are available and what does it look like when I choose those options? So Configurator 360 allows us to leverage not just Inventor iLogic parts, but as well as just any basic assemblies or part files from Inventor that can upload that information into Configurator. As we saw, we can change some of those different platform stations, whether it's going to be a rock wall, and you kind of see the drop-downs Another good thing is there's user prompts. So it prompts kind of the user, lets them kind of see some of the information. So it says, something can't be done. So again, hiding that information, saying this option isn't available in this concurrent configuration. So really kind of gives a nice look to our customers who are trying to configure these models, who are going to purchase this information. And then if they're going to purchase that and they want to request for a quote, what's this going to cost me? I have a simple button that I can enable that's going to give me some simple textual information, my name, my email address, so that I can send this to Autodesk or whoever the company designing this playset, so they can get that request and then they can contact that customer with that information. So really kind of slick interface that we can really start to highlight to bring to home some of that intelligence that we're building inside those models inside of Autodesk Inventor. So Configurator 360 is an extension of the rules and the parts that we're building inside of Inventor. We're really making it an application where the engineer doesn't have to use it. We can really give access to anyone, whether it be internally or with our customers. It's a quick review. Things we can do, we can bring in parts, we can bring in Inventor assemblies, or we can bring in some highly customized Inventor parts and assemblies with Inventor iLogic. The whole thing driving before the force here is we can see those parameters that Kevin highlighted, so naming those parameters, what they're going to do, so working with those models inside of Configurator 360. So kind of just in a recap, there's a couple different technologies that Autodesk has to offer. As we mentioned in the introduction, we're going to talk about iLogic, Configurator 360, and ETO. What Inventor iLogic allows us to do, as you can see, it's a productivity tool for engineers. And it allows us to build in some of the automation. As Kevin mentioned, if it's a task that we're doing very often, or it's a part that's going to be configured multiple times, so rather than redesign it every time, go in on the front end, take away some of those repetitive tasks, spend a little more time on the front end to capture some more of that intent and be able to reuse that downstream. What Inventor ETO is, engineer to order. So really taking the basis of some of those rules we're maybe building in iLogic and expanding upon them. Really starting to automate a lot more of the tasks. So something we're maybe deploying corporate ride for automation for the bid process, maybe doing even some more automation of some detailed drawings and things. But iLogic is going to be on your desktop inside of Inventor. Inventor ETO, it's more flexible. So deploying something on the web, on the mobile, using on the desktop, and where kind of Configurator 360 comes into the play is it can use both. So it can use our iLogic parts as kind of a front-end web configurator for Inventor iLogic parts, or if I'm using a more custom-built application with something like Inventor ETO, it's going to allow me to take that information and I can push it up as well. So you see Configurator 360, desktop, web, or mobile. iLogic is going to be strictly on the desktop, where ETO can be either or, and also incorporate a lot more kind of business process type events. So if we take a look at why we'd want to use one versus the other, if we look at iLogic, if you need to automate repetitive tasks, Inventor iLogic is going to be great for that. Specific for individual users, really great for that. Desktop only. So if you don't have any web requirements, you can use just Inventor iLogic. But if you do have those web or mobile requirements, thinking of adding Configurator 360. So Configurator 360 is going to enhance those opportunities where maybe web or mobile is a requirement. So maybe iLogic with Configurator 360 will help you meet that requirement. If you don't have any requirements to integrate with other enterprise applications, you can see you can start from scratch from very few part numbers and maybe automate some of the drawings. So iLogic will allow us to use some very light automation of the drawings. And now we can look at maybe looking at ETO versus iLogic. So if you're thinking of a larger scale application, ETO is going to be really easy kind of to take over, to start taking over where maybe iLogic kind of meets kind of your limits. Again, if you're thinking about an enterprise space solution, you could probably utilize some iLogic rules, but again, if you're looking at taking that deeper in, maybe expanding out to your sales teams, ETO is going to be an application for you. Deploying on the web or the mobile, as we mentioned, ETO, out of the box, it will allow you kind of to do that, but there's a lot more kind of customization kind of on the front end, more kind of consulting to get that information set up, but allows you to do that Configurator 360 is a platform for both to be able to do that with the web and mobile. Frequently used files, a lot of times, so creating leads to a lot of duplicate files. So ETO is helping to automate the part numbering systems, also being able to automate a lot more of those drawings that are needed for those manufacturing requirements. So there's a quick review of ETO versus iLogic, and please feel free if you want some more information. You can contact Kevin and his team, and they can give you a lot more information on that. So with that, Kevin, I'll turn it back over to you. But there's kind of a quick overview of how we can leverage those iLogic parts, move that information to Configurator 360, and we give you a little bit of snippet of some other technologies we have out there with Inventor ETO. Kevin, you're on mute if you're talking.
I'm sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. So I just want to thank Travis for showing some of the technology that Autodesk has available with their Configurator software, and say thanks for joining us today. And also wanted to highlight that on December 10th, we're going to be doing a Vault Professional webcast to show you, what functionality and features are available in Vault Professional. And on the 11th of December, we're going to do a webcast showing you, talking about your product design suite. There's a lot of software that's in there, and most of us probably focus on one or two of those software packages. But what else is in there? What else can you do? How can you use more of the software that came in your suite? So again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.